Welcome to Paranormal UK Radio, created by Irene Allen and Mark Johnson. Twin Souls is hosted by myself, Philip, along with my twin brother, Ronald Kinsella, in association with the Paranormal UK Radio. A very warm welcome to all our listeners. Now, we're very excited to have with us again the artist, author, paranormal investigator, documentary filmmaker, and radio host, Neil Geddes-Ward, who is here today to talk more about his adventures, research, and ongoing dramas with the paranormal. Hello, Neil.
Hello, Ronnie and Philip, and it's good to be with you once again. What an introduction. I feel like I should go and meet myself.
Well, I know our listeners are really excited to hear more about your adventures, and especially with regards to you dealing with a lot of the spirit communication. So I thought we'd open up with our listeners hearing a little bit more about your further exploit of the other side.
Well, of course, yeah, I'm happy to share that with you. There was one particular day when we had a phone call, and this lady didn't drive or anything, but she was very keen to have a tarot card reading. She asked if I would go and visit her. She showed me the bedroom where her husband, she said, spent the last year of his life in bed, and he was so ill, apparently, that he was on one of these oxygen machines where he had to have a little bit of air now and again to try and breathe. And one day she was puffing his pillows up and leaning him forward to try and make him comfortable. And he just kept saying, "Oh, I feel so ill, I just want to die. I feel so ill, I just want to die." And she said with that, he just went and died in her arms. And so she laid him back down on the pillows, and she said she saw this vaporous mist come out of his chest and went up towards the ceiling, and she followed it, and it tracked across the ceiling and went down into the airing cupboard into the corner of her bedroom. And she was absolutely flabbergasted, thinking, what on earth was that? And anyway, she said, I think this was about 6 months later, she said. Obviously, you know, her husband had been buried and everything like that. And about 3:30 in the morning, she would wake up and she would look across to the airing cupboard because she felt that she had to look across there for some reason. And she said she saw, and this is her words, not mine, she said, "I saw a red Indian coming out of the cupboard. And he appeared to be doing this, and she was doing an emotion as if she was crawling or trying to do a forward crawl or swim or something." Wow. And she was indicating that this red Indian was trying to come out of the cupboard with a bit of an effort. And she said she saw a man behind him in the shadows, and behind that man there appeared to be a third person who had a bowler hat on or some sort of hat on, but he was very indistinguishable, much more darker. But she could very clearly see this red Indian. Now, of course, we say today that he was a Native American Indian. But she says, "I told my doctor and he just laughed at me." And she goes, "Well, I don't know what to make of it." And I said, "Oh, my God." I said, that's probably part of the key, is that under his own power, he can't come back to communicate with you. So he needs like a bus driver, if you like. I was trying to put it in a simple analogy that she would understand. And I said, and the bus driver in this case is this Native American Indian who's got the ability to guide your husband and maybe someone else, maybe a father or someone else like that, that trying to bring them through this cupboard back to you. And I said, and I think your cupboard over there is acting like a revolving doorway between this world and the next. So I said, generally they're called portals, and then they're in certain places. And I said, I believe you're very psychic as well as be able to see this. And she goes, "Well, what do I do?" I said, "Well, the next time it happens," and apparently it was happening on a regular basis around the 3:30 mark in the morning, she would see this. I said, "Well, next time it happens, try and communicate. Ask them what they want. And if you get no joy, then I suggest you ring up the College of Psychic Studies in London, just Director Inquiries 192. Of course, this was the days before the internet, so you had to ring up our friendly people on 192 who would direct you to where you needed to speak to, and they can perhaps help you and explain to them, the College of Psychic Studies, what you told me, and see if they can offer any help or assistance." So with that, I said my goodbyes, trying not to run down the path, and getting into my car and trying not to look in my rearview mirror as well. And I drove off thinking, my God, that's a cracker of an experience. You know, I wasn't expecting that just for a little simple tarot card reading. So, but yeah, I believe that this lady was getting contacted by her husband, and they were coming through portals. And I think there's natural portals around our world. And I believe that mediums generally use a similar thing, an apparatus in physical seances. Physical seances being the thing where manifestations of spirit tend to happen rather than mental mediumship. And as yourself, Philip, with being a mental medium with clairvoyance, you get the mental impressions, pictures in your head, maybe a voice sometimes or something. But with physical mediumship, it goes to it's a rarer thing, of course, but it goes to a much more heightened state where phenomena actually happens. Sometimes people go into trance and a voice comes through them, or physical beings can actually come out of cupboards. A physical medium would use a thing, what they call a trance cabinet, which is where they would have think of like a go behind the screen type of thing at the doctors. They might have a screen and might sit behind it, and the medium would typically be strapped down to a chair to kind of rule out fakery of some sort. And a physical being, like a spirit, would manifest in ectoplasmic form, coming out from the orifice of the body of the sitters and the medium, and form into a solid person on a temporary basis, like a spacesuit. They would walk around the room, shake hands with the sitters. And I believe that what happens is that you need this box-like structure for this energy to build up, and typically a lot of ghosts and spirits seem to be seen in doorways or windows, because this box-like structure is a natural thing in a doorway or window, and the energy bounces around, I believe, around this sort of framework, and it enables some sort of image sometimes, but sometimes, if the energy is right, a much more solid form to come through.
Yes. I mean, I also had an experience with a book that I found in a secondhand bookshop that was written by Dr. Raymond Moody called Reunions. And it's interesting that you mention about the mirrors or glass or doorways, because he had within his book this experiment on scrying. And for those listeners who are not sure about scrying, it means looking into a bowl of water or staring into a mirror. And I know that the Egyptians used this process in communicating apparently with their deceased loved ones. And I had also had an experience with my friend after I'd used this scrying technique, and came home and saw my friend walking and standing and staring in front of me when it was winter. So the glass looked like it was black opaque, an opaque reflection. But it was definitely him. So, yes, I do understand with regards to windows, doors. And I know you've got another theory about that, about openings, haven't you, Neil?
Yes, it's basically, I believe that this kind of, if we take the analogy of a TV set, for instance, it might make it easier for people to understand. Before we had all these big flat screen plasma LCD things that you stick on your wall that stretch from one end of the wall to the other, we used to have these big old square TVs. 4x3 was the format, they called it, and they used to extend quite largely out the back because they had what they call the tube. And basically they'd fire a photon, which was controlled, the beam of the photon was controlled by magnets, or an electron, I can't remember what it is, but they'd fire it to the screen, and this electron would run backwards and forwards across the screen 50 times a second, or to be more scientific, 50 hertz a second, and it'd build up a trace image. Now, because of the effect of your brain trying to comprehend that, this image would change like 24 times in a second and build up a movement, or a frame, if you like, and then the next image would trace along, and you'd get a movement, i.e. a picture moving across the screen. Now, obviously, if you didn't have the sides of that box, of the TV screen, that electron would have nowhere to bounce from it. It'd have no sides to bounce off, so it literally just bounce off into space, and so therefore no image would be able to be seen. So I believe that in a way that a natural medium using their cabinet, it's akin to a TV set, that the electrons or the ectoplasm or the psychic energy would bounce around inside this box, and in the case of the lady I mentioned earlier, it'd perhaps bounce around inside that doorway until it built up. And another analogy is a cake in an oven. You pour it in a liquid state into a tin, you put it in the oven, and you shut the oven door, then you turn the heat up. And again, if you had the oven door open, all that heat would escape and nothing would happen. No chemical change would happen. It has to happen with a change of temperature. So you shut the door to contain that heat, and the temperature is contained, the heat is contained, and it starts to do a change in the liquid state and makes that cake more solid, in the same way that it makes an ectoplasmic form more solid because of a change of the energy in some way, shape or form. That's not to say that a medium's got an oven and he turns it onto gas mark 6 and out walks Auntie Betty. But, it'd be great if it was like that. But, you say, what's that in the oven? You say, oh, it's your Auntie Doris. Here she comes. So I believe that these doorways, natural doorways that we have in our homes, are obviously replicated in the natural world, perhaps in caves or even stone circles, maybe. I don't know for sure. But I believe that they are portals to other systems of reality. And they're ways in which other systems of reality can manifest and come through. And they probably come through naturally, but I believe that we can create them as well.
Yes, that is interesting because I read an account of a fireman who he was in his bedroom with his wife, and one night, of all things, these reptilian creatures just passed through his wall and walked into his room, and he couldn't believe it with his wife. He was absolutely staggered. Well, they obviously observed the pair and then went back through the wall, and this kept continuing, I believe, from what I read. So what he did was he got a special mat and put it underneath the carpet, and then because he wanted footprints of them, he wanted to try and get footprints to see if he wasn't dreaming. And lo and behold, one night they appeared again. They came through the room, they observed the couple. They weren't malicious at all. They were observing the couple in bed and just went back out, and lo and behold, he actually got footprints of them. But the other thing is he must have had shagbark carpet, because one of them snagged its toenail in the carpet and he actually retrieved it. I can't remember what happened to the sample, but it does seem to me that rooms or anything enclosed, as you said, like a TV set or anything like that, builds up energy, or is like it houses, like an oven, the heat or the electromagnetic waves needed, to bring these things through. So yes, very interesting. Always doorways, mirrors, walls, things like that. It's just amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like in the stories we've got The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and they actually travel through the wardrobe into Narnia. So, it's like they've even been used in literature for quite a long time. And your story there, the reptilian, reminds me very much of something I heard from a UFO researcher on YouTube. And he's quite a well-known one now. I think he's deceased, but I forget his name. His first name might be Bill, but I can't remember now. But he spoke of a case of, I think it was an Air Force.
Bill Cooper, isn't it?
It might have been him. Yeah, it might have been him, Philip. He spoke of a case, I think it was an Air Force base, where they had premises for the Air Force personnel to live on. And this particular, I think he might have been a colonel or something like that in the Air Force. Somehow, and I don't know the background to it totally, but somehow he had experiences with these reptilians on a regular basis. He was quite worried about his family and some sort of threat to his family by these reptilians. And so he had posted each corner of his house guards, RAF, not RAF, US guards, military guards or something like that with guns. And one particular day, this Air Force colonel had to go out for a meeting or something like that, and he had to leave his, I think she's 15, 14-year-old daughter in the house by herself, and he'd gone off, and this poor girl was left in the house by herself, but apparently she reported that whilst he was gone, out from the wardrobe came this reptilian, 6'6", stomping down the hallway towards her. She freaked out and ran outside the door. Now, it didn't actually get to her or anything like that, but what it was suggested, or what it was said in this report, was that the reptilians were just proving a point that, despite the fact that they could post guards around the building, they could get to them anytime they wanted. And they were using natural portways, i.e. our own furniture, as ways in. So it's almost like a lesson. You're thinking, I'm going to throw away that wardrobe.
Yeah, it's just like, as you said, the Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. When they come in or go out, they're using these things to materialize or to gain access into our world.
Well, that's right. I mean, if you go back into the Arabian Nights and you got the genie legends and genies coming out of a pot of some sort, they're in a container of some sort. Again, something to contain the energy to build it up to manifest. So in each culture, there's some sort of man-made kind of device or unit, like a box, a container of some sort that these things can come through. And obviously, as a child, you believe the genie was kept in the pot. Once the cork was on, he was trapped in there. But I think that is literally just the way that they can come through. I mean, I've had experiences where deceased friends of mine have allegedly come down the chimney to greet me, which I never saw them, but I was told in the reading, he's come down the chimney and now he's here to speak to you, type of thing. Interesting.
Yes. Yeah, and metaphorically speaking, when the genie is summoned, when they rub the lamp, basically it's like calling for their help.
Yeah, I think, again, that's a ritualistic kind of way of getting there. And
of invoking the spirits, yes.
Yeah. And an interesting story, as we're talking about genies and Arabia and things like that. I had a lady who came and did a talk for my High Wycombe Paranormal meetup group, called Jan. Surname escapes me right now, so apologies to her. But she did a talk for us recently. She's a medium herself, and she said that she has experiences with the Ouija board, and she's a bit of a fan of it. And I mentioned in my last interview with you that I had some experiences with the Ouija board, and so I was interested to hear what she had to say about it. And she said that she was in this hotel stroke bed and breakfast with some of her friends, and they'd taken their Ouija board there with them, and they'd gone upstairs into a kind of an area where they had seen on the radiators socks drying out, but they were odd socks. Someone had put odd socks on the radiators, and her friends were laughing about them, and Jan said, no, just it's their thing, just leave it alone, sort of thing. And they're going to try their Ouija board up there, but they decided no, they felt compelled to go downstairs, and they ended up in the bar of all things, which I wouldn't do with an Ouija board, to be honest, go in the bar area, public bar. But they set up their Ouija board in a public bar, and they started to do it, and they started to get messages. But there was one particular drunk guy sitting in the bar saying, "What are you doing?" And they just tried to ignore him. They said, leave him here, probably just forget about us, sort of thing. And they carried on, and eventually this drunk guy kept getting closer and closer and edging up to try and see what was happening. And as he got closer and closer to their Ouija board session, the messages started to change into a phonetic kind of spelling of some language they didn't understand. But it turned out that this drunk guy, and he had one leg and an artificial leg. This was the guy with the odd socks, of course. He actually recognised the spellings, or rather the words that were coming through, and he recognised them as Iraqi words. And it turns out the message was directed to the drunk guy rather than the people that were doing the actual Ouija board, Jan and her friends. And so it turns out that in Iraqi, there was like a grandfather coming through who was thanking this guy with a false leg, who turned out to be a veteran soldier of the Iraqi war, and he was thanking him for saving his own Iraqi family's life during that time of conflict. And so this really stirred the emotions of this poor chap, and he burst into tears. And in fact, it was a relief. He got a lot of weight off his shoulders by having this contact with the Ouija board. And it's interesting that a lot of people think the Ouija board is a dangerous tool, but in this particular instance, it actually helped someone, which was quite an interesting way of looking at it. And it's interesting, they didn't use the Arabic script. They was using English letters phonetically to get their message across. There's like an intelligence behind it in some way.
Yeah, and also about the socks. You mentioned something in a brief discussion with us a while back about the socks.
Yeah, that's right. He had obviously got an artificial leg from the Iraqi war, and so he was using one sock for presumably his artificial leg and one sock for his normal leg. Why they weren't the same, I don't know. But
that's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it was just the way he did things, I guess.
As you are aware, Neil, that we had an experience many years ago with regards to using the board, and it gave proof, absolute categoric proof, that we weren't dealing with something that was just like, our energies pushing the glass around the table, that there was some other form of alternative intelligence communicating with us. But, I find it interesting with the spirit guides that, I used to question why it was us that our spirit guides, mine is a North American Indian, why they came in this guise. And the message I got was that, well, if they turned up in a suit, the medium wouldn't know who they were. And I kind of like found that really humorous.
Well, yeah, it sounds like they turn up for an interview, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got the job.
Definitely.
Yeah, but it's interesting. Only a few days ago, my partner Monica and I went and saw this chap who was a healer. His name's called Ray Brown. I think he lives in Wales now, but he travels around the UK with his wife, and he's been doing this, I believe, since the 60s or 70s. He's now 72 himself, so he started when he was like 16. But he was doing normal healing, and I think when he became a teenager going into his 20s, he basically started to trance this spirit guide who called himself Paul. And he was allegedly the same character in the Bible who was Saul, who converted on the road to Damascus and became a Christian, and then he changed his name to Paul. And later he was beheaded by the Romans. Well, this particular character has turned up as a spirit guide for this gentleman called Ray Brown, and now he does kind of trance channel kind of healing through him. So basically he holds surgeries around the UK, and people go to him. They have a quick 10-minute kind of healing session with them, and then he might say, well, come back in a month and we'll see how it goes, sort of thing. But apparently there's a great lot of testimonials to his healing on his website. So this is what prompted Monica to go along for a kind of a trial run to see how she was getting on, and she actually felt a lot better from the results of that, which was interesting. And when we went there, you kind of build up a thing of what you're going to expect. So you expect you're going to meet Ray and shake him by the hand, and then he's going to sit there for a few minutes whilst he goes into trance. But no, he's in trance the whole time as Paul, and he's literally like that the whole day, apart from maybe the lunch break when he goes out of trance and he probably has a sandwich and a cup of tea or something, and then after the lunch break, Paul comes back and he goes back to healing again. So, I mean, I was thinking, my God, this Paul talks very eloquently, rather posh. And I thought, God, he could go down the bank and, pop a check in or something as Paul, this spirit guide. And no one would know, because he's walking around with his eyes open, putting his hands in the pockets, talking like every day. He's not doing a weird voice or anything like that. Like you might think, oh, that's definitely a spirit guide. He sounds like a normal guy.
It's like Seth. I mean, the Jane Roberts material, I know that you're aware of Jane Roberts and of her research and work, because she also channeled a spirit entity called Seth, didn't she? And with regards to her book, Seth Speaks, and The Validity of the Soul by Jane Roberts, she was another very incredible communicator for those on the other side, or a higher dimensional intelligence. And I know that one of her books, Seth Speaks, is still and has raised quite a lot of interesting speculation with regards to the nature of the universe itself. So I'm in no doubt that there are really genuine people out there, Neil, who can communicate with or are communicated through by these higher intelligences. Always reminds me of that children's program. Do you remember Chucky here in England? The Chucky program, where the boy was in touch with an extraterrestrial intelligence, like an orb of energy. And so, it makes for great thinking, doesn't it?
I don't remember Chucky, actually. I don't know why. The only Chucky I remember from the 70s was a curly-whirly every Saturday morning from my parents. But I do remember the Seth books. It's one of those great introductions to the whole wide world of clairvoyance and trance and things like that. And I remember buying it from the shop Mysteries in London. And it was a massive, great big book, Seth Speaks, but she wrote an earlier book called How to Use Your ESP, and that was where Seth first became known to her, because they were at the time with her husband using a Ouija board, experimenting with it and writing down the notes of how to maybe best apply it. And I believe that they got in communication with this spirit personality called himself Frank Withers, and he started to talk about himself over about 5 or 6 sessions. And during I think it was about the 6th session of using this Ouija board with this personality known as Frank Withers, Robert Butts, Jane Roberts' husband, sort of noticed that Jane was quite nervous each time she started to use this Ouija board, and each time the letters were being spelled out. So he asked the question, why is Jane nervous about us doing this session today? And this Frank Withers character came back and he says, it's because she knows what is going to be spelled out on the board. And they thought, that's weird. Why is that then? And then he said, in fact, I'd rather dispense with this personality of Frank Withers and go by my other name. You can call me Seth. And that's where Seth then became known to Jane Roberts and Robert Butts. And he was actually using one of his, what he called a fragment personality, which was one of his other lives that he's lived from the 1940s, I think it was. And I think he had to make himself come through in that way as a normal human, in quotes, because I believe that they had to get used to the idea, first of all, of contacting a dead person. So they would have never accepted the idea of a higher soul or a spirit guide or anything like that, because they were treading carefully in the realm of the dead, as it were. So they would have completely rejected the idea of Seth. So he had to tread carefully and put on a pair of kid gloves to treat them gently. And this kid glove was the Frank Withers personality, which I thought was a novel approach.
Yes, gently breaking them in. In relation to the Ouija board, which Philip and I used, we were very, very sceptical about it to begin with. And what we did was we cut out letters and put them around a table and used a glass as a planchette. And it started moving. We had a friend with us, Susan, who is a very trusted friend. And it's Philip and I, lo and behold, it started moving. But what it kept doing was, because they were just resting on the table, the cutout letters, they kept falling off. But we got communication, and it was only me and Philip using it. And I said to Philip, as it started moving towards, I can't remember exactly what it started to say, but I wanted proof. I said to Philip, this is ridiculous. I mean, we know we don't lie. Both of us are always honest. But we said we need some proof. So I said to Susan, can you go and write something down on a piece of paper? Go out the room, take a pen and paper, write something down, put it in your pocket and come back in. Well, she did. So then I addressed the board. At the time, we didn't know who it was we were talking with. I wasn't nervous, just a little bit cautious. And I said, right, can you please spell out what Susan has got in her pocket? And the one thing it did, first of all, it moved the planchette to trickery. And I said, no. If in our position, you would want clarification, confirmation that what we're dealing with is genuine. And then it started moving to DARTHMAUL, while Susan's face went white. And she pulled out the piece of paper and just held it up. But it was at a time when one of these Star Wars films wrote a character called Darth Maul or something. Well, she had written Darth Maul. So the confirmation was there. It was correct. And then it spelt satisfied. Well, using that tool, we knew we had something. I don't know what it was. The entity never made itself known at the time, but it goes to prove, like Jane Roberts using the Ouija board with Seth, yes, there is definitely something paranormal occurring with it, but very, very interesting, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading about Ouija boards and how science views them, and they call them motor movements or something, so it's your subconscious moving it, they say, which of course we know is rubbish.
It's rubbish.
I mean, I've seen the glass whiz around so quick, whilst it's spelling something you're not even expecting it to say, that you can't even keep your hand on the glass. The energy is so potent with it. So if they somehow think that your finger is moving it backwards and forwards, and plus that it's moving to letters that, from my perspective, are upside down to me, and so you're having to get other people who are on their side of the board to try and spell out what it's seeing, you see. And since the time with Heavenly Voices that we did a few months ago, where we got really amazing results, this is a team down in the Weymouth area who we were kind of just thrown in the deep end at the last minute to do a session with them. Totally unexpected, but we're glad we did. I recorded it, and my mother came through and other people came through with fantastic results. Yes. We thought, well, let's try this ourselves. So I ordered a table off of Amazon, and I got some stick-on letters rather than just paper letters. We put the stick-on letters on, I made the table up and everything, and we went round to a mutual friend of ours, and we thought it might take 2 or 3 sessions to get our version of it up and running, but it started off within 5 minutes of us putting up the table, and we thought, oh my God, this is definitely plugged into the ether in some way, shape or form.
There's a lot of them up there.
Yeah, that's right. So basically, what we found was, though, and it's like, I think, although my mother came back very clearly on the other board of the Heavenly Voices team, she did attempt to make contact with our board, and other people came through as well. But it was a bit of a broken response. It's almost like the analogy is if they've got a new smartphone And yes, they've used their other phone before with great results.
Yes,
but this time they're trying to get the hang of the new letters on this one, and they're trying to find the little, where do we find this? And they were moving the glass backwards and forwards. So, for instance, the glass would start off in the centre, and it'd go to the A, and then it'd go back to the centre, and then it'd go to the B, and then back to the centre. And it'd do that backwards and forwards in a clockwise fashion, almost checking out the board, scanning it, and things like that. Whereas I think, in a way, that the table... and the energies of the people in the Heavenly Voices team, they've been doing it for 7 years, so I think they've got their skill pretty honed. So I was pleased that we're even getting a moving glass, even if though it was coming out with Dyslexic Weekly or something,
Well,
yeah, carry on, Philip. Go on.
No, I was going to say that, I know that, and that the listeners will be aware that you're very much a down-to-earth, practical guy, and that you've done a lot of research. You've met a lot of people, and also I think there's something interesting as well that we spoke about briefly, not on the radio, but about the owls, because you did mention also about your encounters, and I think the listeners would love to hear this about owls, which I think is really very, very interesting and very spooky as well.
Shall I do it in my Jimmy Savile voice?
No. No,
I won't.
No, we don't want him coming through the board.
No, that's right. Yeah, that's one glass I'll throw in the fire. What it was, and this is going back to the early 90s. My then wife was pregnant, and she suffered a miscarriage. And 1 month after the miscarriage, on a full moon, she woke in the night to say, "Oh my God, this owl woman has just flown through the wall over my head. It had an owl's face, it had owl wings, barn owl wings and face, but a human female body. And I felt the feathers brush my face as it flew over me, and it flew out the window." And I thought, you must be dreaming. But the next day, we looked through the books we had, which were pagan books at the time, and the only thing that we could find that kind of might have explained it was this pagan goddess called Hecate, who typically came in the form of a barn owl, and she was there, according to the book, to take the souls of the newborn dead, typically children, back to the spirit realms, and she was like an assistant to do this kind of thing. So we thought, maybe it's something to do with that miscarriage then. We wasn't really sure. So we'd be driving down the road sort of like, maybe a week or two later, and then suddenly we would encounter a barn owl sitting in the middle of the road, and it wouldn't budge.
Wow.
We're stopping, and we've got the headlights on the barn owl, and it's just looking at us. So we tooted it, and then the barn owl flew, and it literally flew right over the windshield of the car, like really in a spooky fashion. We thought, oh my God, this is freaky, all this barn owl stuff. And we decided that with all these weird experiences that we would do something creatively with it. So I did a painting of this Hecate, the barn owl faced woman with the wings and a female body, and Alison, my ex-wife, did a play with this barn owl woman featured in it, and featuring the character of Hecate. And anyway, Channel 4 were doing a series called In Your Dreams at the time, and I had found out that they were doing this series through the old teletext service that used to be on the TV back in those days.
You remember that?
Yeah, and the reason I did it is because I couldn't actually sleep. I must mention about the dream, actually. I forgot to mention this dream. There was a dream that also the reason that I did this particular painting wasn't just because of Alison's experience. I had had a strange dream-like experience, which kind of tied the two ends together in a way. And what had happened was I was walking through the woods with Alison, and in the dream, I'd seen a barn owl in a tree. And by this time, Alison was pregnant again. And so she was obviously really, really worried that she was going to have another miscarriage, you see. So when I had this dream, it all kind of made sense. And the dream was that we were walking through the woods. I'd seen this barn owl in the tree. And I said, oh, look, that barn owl appears to be injured. Let's go and take it to the vet. So I took it to the vet in the dream. And the vet said, well, let's give it a little test flight. And it flew around the room and went out the window and was promptly eaten in the dream by a great big albatross bird. And it swallowed it whole. And I thought, oh, no, it's got my pet barn owl and it's gone and eaten it. And I started walking home from the vet's all upset, just with like a feather left in my hand sort of thing. And then a few minutes later in the dream, another barn owl landed on my shoulder. And I said, oh, the barn owl is back with me. My pet barn owl's back with me. And then a voice said in my dream, it said, no, this is a sister of the first barn owl. This is a sister of the first barn owl. And then me and this barn owl, we took off in the night sky and we flew over villages and towns and things like that. And it's a full moon lit night. And it's rather like the scene in the Snowman film with the little boy and the snowman flying over the towns and villages in the animation. It was just like that. And I felt so spiritually happy and elated when I woke up. So when Alison said she was really worried that she was going to have another miscarriage, I said, no, you're not. I definitely know you're not going to have another miscarriage. And I explained that dream to her, and I said the first barn owl that we saw that was injured in the tree was the first pregnancy you had, and that had to go back to its higher self, its greater self, i.e. the bigger bird, hence the miscarriage. And the one that landed on my shoulder and we flew off into the night sky was the one that I was going to have an adventure with on Earth, and that was the sister of the first barn owl, and this was the next baby to come along. Now, that was Morgan, my daughter. Now, she happened to be born on the 15th of August, and we actually later found out that the 15th of August was a celebration day in the country of Italy, and they call that Hecate's Day, would you believe?
Oh, my Lord.
Yeah, so that was a bit of a strange coincidence. Now, on the day that she was born, Alison was moved up to the postnatal ward where all the mothers are put up there with their babies, and Alison had realised that she'd left some of her bags and things down in the delivery room. So I said, don't worry, I'll go down and get them. Now, rather than take the lift, because it'd take ages, it's just quicker to run down 2 flights of stairs. So as I was going down the stairs, I saw this pregnant lady coming up the stairs with her partner, and I overheard a conversation as I went down the stairs, and she said to her partner, by the way, when are we going to see your friend with the pet barn owl? And I did a double take. I thought, oh my God, here's this barn owl resurfacing again as another synchronistic message. And I thought, how bloody weird is that?
That's amazing.
Now the story doesn't end there, of course. As I say, Channel 4 filmed us. And by the time that Channel 4 got hold of the story, it was like 3 years later. And my daughter was then 3. And what had happened is that we'd gone away on holiday, and she was... I think it was to Devon. It was a camping holiday, and Alison had gone to have a shower in the campsite showers, and I was just doing the washing up, outside the tent, and my daughter Morgan was playing, and then suddenly she hid under my legs and gripped me tightly, all frightened. I said, what's the matter? She goes, Daddy, I'm scared. I said, well, what's the matter? And she goes, I can see Hecate, because we'd told her about this barn owl lady, and she said, I can see Hecate. I said, well, where is she? She goes, she's over there in the trees, and she's got a barn owl face, and she's got scary eyes. And I said, oh. Now I looked, I couldn't see a thing. And I said, don't worry. I said, I think it's just Hecate checking in on you to see if you're having a nice holiday. And with that, she said, oh, she's gone now. And then Alison came back from the showers, and I said, you're not going to believe this, I whispered. I said, Morgan has just seen Hecate. And she kind of gulped. And of course, the next day, Alison then suffered a miscarriage. Oh. Now, the interesting thing about it is that no one knew that she was pregnant. Not even Morgan, my daughter, knew that she was pregnant. The only 2 people that knew she was pregnant, myself and Alison. And yet, Morgan had correctly seen this goddess-type figure, Hecate, who comes when there's a baby to be taken back to the spirit world. She'd seen her in the trees. And then the very next day, the warning was true. Alison had another spirit that had to go back to the spirit world in the form of a miscarriage, which I thought was very interesting. And after that, never happened again. Just vanished. Wow. No more experiences.
So Hecate is like the keeper of the dead. She's ready to take them, just as Anubis was in Egypt times.
Yeah. And why? I mean, when people pass over to the spirit world as adults, they generally say, oh, in the case of my mum, she said her own mother came to collect her. But for some reason, children or unborn souls, if you like, ones that are just touching the earth very briefly, seem to be taken symbolically at least by Hecate. And maybe in other countries it's a different character entirely. I mean, I had no kind of interest in barn owls at that point. I had no interest in pagan symbols or goddesses or anything like that. So to me, I still wondered why on earth it was coming in this strange form to me. But there we go.
Yeah, well, the barn owl is quite prominent, and they always seem to be associated with some aspect of the human soul, whether it be a baby or a child or a fully grown adult. And I know that there are different forms of symbology with regards to the owl. I mean, I know that in abduction cases, UFO abduction cases, many people report seeing owls, and they sometimes believe that when they get to adulthood, that these are symbolic of some type of screen memory. So, and we also have the Mothman prophecies, which were well documented. And of course, most of those prophecies in America came true with regards to the Mothman, and so there's different forms, different creatures, different symbolisms of them, which obviously denote their different purposes within this life and for the life on the other side. So I totally understand, and I think that's really incredible that you had all of this symbolism. And I would not suggest in any way that it was coincidence. I believe that it's synchronicity.
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned that experience in various talks that I've done, and other people have come up to me and they said, I have had miscarriages too, and what you said about the owl makes perfect sense to me, because after my miscarriage I was really, really upset, and I had a tarot card reading, and it was a different tarot card reading from the normal pack from what I understand, because she said the card that she picked out, the very first card she picked out when she asked a question to do with her miscarriage, had a barn owl figure in it. So it kind of resonated with her, my story, which was very, very weird. And interesting, another lady I met at a recent talk, I think it was last October actually, a year ago, when I was talking at the Probe conference at Lytham St Anne's up in near Blackpool. I did my Encounters with Fairies, Ghosts and Spirits talk, and I mentioned about spirits and things in hospitals and things like that. And this lady said that she had lost her baby. It was actually a stillbirth, and in hospitals these days, apparently they kind of do a different approach, where they put the baby in a cot, even though it's dead. They put the baby in the cot beside you, and they leave the mother by themselves, and they're just left there for as long as they need to sort of try and come to terms with it and sort of see their baby, even though it's dead. And this woman said that this happened to her, and she sat on the bed with her head in her hands thinking, I've got to be strong for my family, but how on earth can I be strong? And here's my dead baby, I've just had that, and I just can't be strong. And she said suddenly the door swung open, and in came, she reckons, about 5 or 6 tiny centaurs, literally marching into the room. They had, the centaur bodies with tiny hooves and things like that, and they're about 3 foot high each. But she said they weren't pretty. They were very, very ugly to look at. And two of them looking in the cot at the dead baby, and 2 of them were looking at her in her face with a kind of curiosity. And she said she wasn't sure how long they stayed for, but it was maybe 5 or 6 minutes. She didn't exactly sort of say if they did anything after that or if they vanished, but she just remembers that experience, that there they were for about 5 or 6 minutes, and they weren't pretty, she said, but they'd come in, and somehow it changed her. It kind of took her focus off this kind of mood she was in and changed her in some way. But it's a very peculiar experience, and one that she's not likely to share with many people, but it's because I was doing my talk on Encounters with Fairies, Ghosts and Spirits, that one she thought, I must tell this guy because he's talking the same kind of language as me.
Interdimensional entities. I mean, I very much believe, as you know, in the spirit world, in the UFO phenomena, and in the little folk, obviously the other dimensions, which you have reported on a previous programs. But I will tell you something interesting, because when I do link with clients who have lost or a stillborn child comes through, their level of communication is very different. For instance, one client came, and I could see a boy, but the boy was only able to communicate the fact that I'm in darkness, that I was cold, and there was some problem around within the head. So we can see, even though the soul is evolved when it comes into the human body and goes back out again, when it experiences the first parts of human life, it's not able to communicate as it would, as it had been in the spirit world, and as it returned back to the spirit world. So I do understand the main applications of spirit communication, and why some people also and have these very strange and bizarre experiences that throw them off track and brings their focus into another alternative reality to try and help them. It's not always to hinder. On some occasions, it's to help. And you yourself are an artist. I mean, you're a brilliant artist. And so, your connection with the fairy folk and all of this type of thing is obviously the reality that you're walking. And this is why you are attracted and drawn to that other realm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still very much into the spirit world type of thing and the UFOs, and I listen to all of it, really. I mean, I was listening to something recently on YouTube by the late, great Tony Todd, who I believe... Tony Dodd, that's it, who was a UFO researcher. But I'm not sure when he passed away, but I saw this video. It was dated from 1995, I believe. And he was talking about some UFO research that he's done, including animal mutilations. But he was talking also about this boy that was abducted on a regular basis called Jason. He was only a young boy, but he was taken up into a craft, and they appeared to be the typical greys with the big almond-shaped eyes. But he said that he could see behind a mask. And in fact, behind this mask, because they actually removed it at some point, he described, and this is before, in the mid-90s, before people were talking about this, he described it as an insectoid type of creature, which we might call it a praying mantis today, I suppose, in some kind of reports and things. But he said that he thought they all had masks on, and they actually made a mask for him, this young boy Jason, and where the almond eyes would have been, they actually poured like a liquid. Once he had this mask on, they poured a liquid in each eye socket, and it built up and formed into this kind of dark almond-shaped eye for him to wear, which is very bizarre. And it's like a young boy can't really make that up, can he?
No. I must say that the Praying Mantis, I've documented this in Twin Souls. I've never seen a grey, but when I was about 4 years old, I did see one of these tall praying mantis creatures. It was tan in colour. It had insect-like eyes. It didn't speak. It just appeared before me. It was tall. Well, being a toddler, it would be. And it was, as it moved, it was making a clicking sound. And I got from it absolute malice. I mean, I ran. I remembered screaming from it. It was in, I think, Bignell House, I think, at the time, somewhere around there. But yes, it was certainly very alarming, this thing. But yes, very interesting.
I also think as well, what's interesting is the fact that it could be that the Greys themselves are trying to give some form of symbolic message. I mean, I myself, Philip, I have had an abduction back in 1989, and I claim no sensationalism with that, but it was a very negative experience. And it could be that the Greys are trying to show the people they're abducting of what they intend for us. Are we to become them, or are we part of them? We don't know. But I will tell you that one of the entities I did see near the end of my encounter, I know that there was a picture that I did for television that was circulating of Noddy, I called him, although he was anything but Noddy. His face was very grey-like, but almost humanoid. He was quite small, and he had a very tall pointed hat, ridiculous hat. But if you can imagine watching animated plastic moving, and that was something that truly distressed me, because I was trying to ask this thing how it was they're able to take me through locked and bolted doors, and I remembered that. So with regards to many of the encounters, whether it be fairy, UFO, spirit, there is some kind of hidden symbology behind it, and I think it's up to the individual to try and work it out themselves. But as I said, I've never ever to this day understood why they did what they did and why I saw what I did. But I sometimes believe that some of these encounters do open up some larger part of the human psyche. And obviously these things are connected to creative people, to other people who want to utilize their mind on different levels of reality or creation.
Yeah, now it's interesting. They take a lot of kids or youngsters and things in their abductions. But I mean, there was a story that I recently reread or re-experienced through a guy on YouTube talking about it from an old gent in Hampshire. And I remember first reading this, I think, in a Timothy Good book. So this was a guy talking about something that was printed in one of Tim Good's excellent UFO books. And I can't remember the name of the gentleman, but he was fishing, doing an overnight fish on a towpath, canal towpath somewhere in Hampshire. And it must have been the summer months. He could still see the water and things like that. He had his dog with him. And it got to about 4 o'clock in the morning, and he saw what he thought was two small young children coming down the canal towpath towards him. And they were beckoning to him. They didn't say anything. They just waved their hands and sort of like said, "Come here," encouraged them to go forward. So he left his dog there at the canal towpath with the fishing rod and everything, and followed these, what he thought were young children. But as he went round the corner and past the bushes, he saw this landed flying saucer. It appeared to have ski-type legs with a kind of ladder going into it. And of course, he then realised what it was, and he thought, well, I'm old now. If this is the end of my days, so be it, kind of thing. He resigned himself to the fact that this is it. So they beckoned him to go up the steps into the craft, so he did so. And when he got in there, he heard a voice, and it was speaking English, and it said, "Please step into the yellow light." Now, he couldn't actually see a yellow light from where he was standing in the doorway. But the interesting thing about this chap is that he was describing the inside of this flying saucer exactly as other witnesses have described elsewhere, where they say the light appears to come from all around. There's no single source of light. It seems to somehow be coming somehow through the wall, but you can't pinpoint it exactly. But he also described this large central column in the middle of this flying saucer, which other people think could be the power source. And he then walked round this central column, and that's when he caught sight of this yellow beam that he was asked to go and then stand under. So he went and stood under it, quite, without an issue, stood under this yellow beam, and then it asked him to turn around, and then scanned him on the other side. And it said, "How old are you?" this voice said. And he said, "I will be 79 on my next birthday." And it said, "You are too old and infirm for our usefulness or for our needs." And so they said, "Thank you." And so he just got up and walked away, and he took one last look at the UFO before he went away and went back down the steps, and he went back to the canal towpath and carried on fishing. He didn't run home to his wife or anything. He just carried on fishing till it got to daylight, How weird is that?
He sounds like a thick-skinned farmer,
Yeah.
I think sometimes what can normally happen is that the person or the individual that's going through this experience sometimes is overcome with some kind of like Oz factor. I know that Jenny Randalls, the British UFO author, had coined this term, the Oz factor, these strange experiences that happen, and also what people experience afterwards, like a lot of paranormal activity. But I know that there was an interesting case that you mentioned also, Neil, about that was through Bud Hopkins, the late Bob Hopkins, the wonderful American researcher into UFO abductions, with his book Witnessed, where there was a lady that was seen being abducted outside of a high-rise building and graze around this apparent UFO. And this had also been witnessed by a prominent American figure within the governmental circles. And again, these things about, these strange things happening, was that when I read that book, Witnessed, you discovered that there are more parts to it than just the actual witnessing of the craft and the aliens and of this lady being abducted. There was a lot more that connected with it within the future. So sure, I absolutely believe that a lot of these things they don't just happen for, no apparent reason. There are reasons behind why things happen, and it's for us to work them out, like you yourself with the owl.
Yeah, I mean, there are always puzzles to these things, and we're finding little jigsaw pieces and trying to connect them up, aren't we?
Yes.
The interesting thing is that the puzzles, as explained by the skeptics, and I think of Dr. Susan Blackmore, it was recounted by Tony Dodd in this video. He said he had many arguments on radio shows with Susan Blackmore, and she was all of the opinion, whether it was a paid opinion, I don't know, but she was the opinion where the abductions of people who claim to be abducted by aliens, it's all sleep paralysis. It happens while they're in their sleep and blah, 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 blah. And as he pointed out, he said, but actually, if you think about it, a lot of these abductions happen when people are walking down the street, or like the lady coming out of a bedroom, or the guy on the towpath, things like that. They're actually awake. They're not asleep in bed half of the time.
That's right.
So her arguments were falling not on good ground as such, because they didn't really cast any kind of reasoning with Tony Dodd, and he knew that the evidence was much, much stronger than she was putting forward.
Yeah. It's always, why do they always poo-poo it? You always get them. They're not there. They didn't experience it. And the lady in the high-rise who was taken up by the Greys into the ship, it was witnessed by a prominent senator. The car was stopped, the guards got out, and he actually saw it occur.
That's correct. So the other thing as well, too, is interesting is that, I find that all of these subject matters are delicious recipes for investigation. And I think, and I know categorically, we've seen them, other people have seen them, and it's too bad if those apparent scholars tried to convince the public that we're all doolally. And if it was all to do with dream state or the psychological element going out of control, for instance, us all, because we've seen a lot of films on aliens, why aren't we all being kidnapped by Darth Vader or stormtroopers or by Harry Potter?
Yeah, it's because what they're not comfortable with, they'll brush under the rug. They don't teach any of this at school. They don't want people to know about it. They know something's going on, but they try and poo-poo it all the time. We've said this again and again. They will just completely ridicule it. And you know what? At least we've seen things like that, and you have too, because it's opened our eyes. Do they really think it so entertaining for us to actually come out with these things? I mean, years ago you were labelled as being loopy, but now I think people are more respectfully taking a much more positive view of it.
There are disturbing parts of it. I mean, I mentioned earlier that Tony Dodd talked about the animal mutilations, and the High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup Group, our next meeting, has got David Caton, who's going to be doing a presentation on his research into the animal mutilations for the past 20 years. In fact, he knew Tony Dodd as one of his kind of research colleagues, and I actually posted a lot of these ads for the event that I'm promoting out into various Facebook groups, including Skeptics in the Pub, and they come back straight away with the answers. These are armchair researchers that don't do anything, of course. They just go around saying it's all wrong, it's all incorrect. They come out with the theory that all these large cattle, and of course you've got to extend it not just into cattle, but all sorts of wild animals, including seals as well, and other creatures, they're all killed by foxes, and so what we're seeing are the injuries resulting from foxes and things like that. And it was proved by the FBI many years ago, and of course, well, the FBI would prove it, wouldn't they? They're not vets, of course.
No, it's all poppycock. We know the real truth. Anyway, the time's come up so quickly, Neil, and we want to know what are you up to, and how can people get hold of you, and this type of thing. So let us know.
Well, Philip and Ronnie, I am doing a talk at something called the Day of Weird on November the 11th at a pub called the North by Northwest Pub in Islington in London. There'll be a lot of other speakers there talking about strange creatures, the cryptozoology, a bit like the Sasquatch and strange creatures like that. And I'll be meeting, hopefully, one of Ray Harryhausen's assistants from his filming days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he'll be there talking about his work with Ray Harryhausen. So it's going to be an interesting day, and I'll be doing my talk there, a shorter version. I've only got 45 minutes to do a talk there, so it'll have to be a very condensed version.
Yes.
And then I've been signed up for, this is a long way off, a year hence. I've been signed up. As soon as I got back from my talk in Bradford, I had an email asking me from the Cornwall UFO conference if I would be interested in doing a talk for them next year. So I've been signed up to do a talk for them next year, next October. So that give me at least a year to have a close encounter. I'll probably forget it though, won't I?
Don't wish it. Don't wish it.
Yeah. And then, and if people want to contact me, they can reach me through Neil at Geddes-Ward.co.uk. So that's NEIL at GEDDESWARD.co.uk. They can email me, and they can put a subject line, Twin Souls Radio, something like that, just so I know where they've come from. And and maybe I'll see a few of the listeners out on the road at various conferences. That'd be great.
And you also have your own radio show too, don't you?
Of course, Ronnie. Thank you very much for remembering that. Yes, it's the Paranormal Peep Show, and I present that with a medium, a very talented medium by the name of Andrew Chaplin, And we've been doing that for nearly a year now. So we've had lots of wonderful guests, including your good selves as well. So we go out on every third Thursday of the month from 8 till 10 at www.paukradio.com. And you can also listen to that and also your show as well on Stitcher, Podbeam and iTunes and other archival stations as well. So these can always be listened again. Oh,
well,
wow.
Neil, we've got to thank you so much, and we also thank you. We wish you the best of luck with what's coming forward for you, and we want to thank our listeners for listening, to Ronnie and to myself as well. And you've been listening to Twin Souls in association with the Paranormal UK Radio Network, created by Owen Allen and Mark Johnson. Be safe.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.